All right, welcome everybody to this exciting video. I've got David Hall, aka Halsey here. How's it going, Halsey?
Going well, going well. How are you doing, man?
I'm good. I'm good. All right, so this video or mini series of videos is all about game types. And the reason why we wanted to go over this early on is for people who are just getting started out in learning about game development, maybe wondering if they want to be an effects artist or something else as a game artist. And we wanted to break down the different game types because it really, really matters what you work on. That's going to define a lot about the type of work you do, the type of skills that you need to have. It's not the same working on different games. They have totally different aspects to them. Even between Halsey and I, there's a lot of these different types of games that we're going to talk about that we are not as familiar with. We only know by observation or by working as a like second party with studios that have done these kinds of games. So we're going to do our best. We're going to cover it all. And we're going to start out with style today. Um, are you ready, Halsey, to dive in?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's do it. So, okay, so it might help if we start by defining the word style. If you had to define the word style, Halsey, how would you do that?
Oh gosh,
That's a big question.
it's a big one. It's so broad, like it applies to so many things. But you know, we've talked about this a little bit off and on, how it is the representation of the art. Like,
Hmm.
what's the overall direction? How do we want to visualize a lot of these things? And it that translates to style for the most part. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's so broad. It merits its own description. Like, it's just not a simple thing anymore these days, I don't think.
It's funny because historically, style was defined by an artist. So there was like in the Renaissance, each artist had their style. The
Mm,
Impressionists had their individual styles. The golden age of illustration, those illustrators had their style individually. Certain directors of films or cinematographers definitely have a style, like a house style that they prefer to use for their films. Games are fascinating to me because the styles can be similar to each other or they can be wildly different. They can be tightly controlled or they can be kind of all over the place. We worked on League of Legends together, you and I,
mhm.
and League has a very specific style, but also the different skin lines each have their own style, and sometimes the different champions have their own style. And these all kind of live together in this really eclectic environment where there's this huge variety of styles going on within it, I guess, within a certain boundary. Um, but yeah, so stylized. So what about realistic games? Aren't there realistic games too? What
As
do you
far as
think?
I'm aware, yeah. Uh, but even then, like, if you're saying, hey, we're taking the visual direction, like we're working on the next Call of Duty or something, and we want to have
Mhm.
like a very realistic type style, it's still uh, it's still a point of direction in, okay, how are we going to shape things, how are we going to color things. We want to match realism closer than having our own artistic uh, expression or take on
Mhm.
something. I suppose that's one way of defining the realistic side of things. Yeah.
Right, but if a live action film has a style, as we were saying, then is there's really truly no pure realism. I mean, we talk about this like it's a spectrum. There's the stylized end of the spectrum and the realistic end of the spectrum, right? But at the end of the day, it's all a style. It's all stylized. Even when it feels cinematic, it feels like it's live action footage that you're looking at in the game. There was
Mm-hmm.
somebody directing that style. It was stylized in a way. So,
Mm.
stylized to me is such a broad term, and realistic is
Very
also a
broad,
very
yeah.
broad term. And I think we need to get a little more specific. So that's what we're going to do. And we're going to do it so that people can, I think, have a better grasp on maybe what interests them and what they might want to pursue, at least for now, especially if you're starting out as a beginner. You might be curious, like, what kind of game do I want to work on? What kind of style do I want to work in? And we're going to kind of break that down with some examples here, and we'll kind of just alternate and comment as we go. We Halsey and I are talking all the time, and our conversations always wander and meander. So we'll see how that goes today.
We're gonna
Um,
try our best.
we'll
Stay
try
on
to stay
target.
on
Stay
target.
on target.
We have notes. If you see me looking over at my notes, that's what we're trying to get for. Um, okay, cool. So we tried looking up in a thesaurus alternate words to use for style to get more specific, and I think at the end of the day, there really isn't
Nothing
anything.
was, yeah, nothing was really
It
working.
doesn't.
It's like that's not it. That's not it. You know.
Yeah.
Another way of looking at it. I'm sure you've heard this a thousand times. For example, when I was in college,
Hmm.
we'd be in like a drawing class or something,
Yeah.
and inevitably there would be someone there who presents something, and it's less than ideal, less than like accurate, to put it very nicely. They were doing their best, obviously, but they try to cover it up by saying, "Oh, that's just my style. That's just like, no, this is an anatomy class. Like this is like life drawing. We're trying to get the anatomy here. There's no style for this thing." And so what I'm trying to make here very loosely is style is an emergent quality that happens after, like, and it just happens automatically most of the time. uh, I think you brought up, like, hey, film directors, they have particular styles. uh, Maybe they weren't really shooting for that in the beginning, but it just kind of evolved, and they're like, oh, this is a
Mhm.
shortcut formula for myself that feels fluid. It feels
Mhm.
very comfortable. It works really well. And so, yeah, that's what I think of in terms of how style can morph and evolve on the personal level, but then also on the team level, where you just find something that clicks,
Mhm.
and then all of a sudden you weren't looking for this specifically, but you were trying to find something unique, and you found it. And I think that just kind of like it's an emergent quality, so to speak.
Yeah. I think that, I mean, that's fantastic, and I think that be, beneath styles we find pillars that sort of prop up a style, and the same two pillars might describe multiple game styles. So, like, I want to give some examples of different pillars, and we'll show some footage from some of these games that we're mentioning. So, say your pillars are like bright and friendly. So, I would think of Mario 3D World when I'm thinking of those two pillars. It has a style that's defined by uh, a very inviting, cartoony, rounded feeling, with also a very punchy timing, very satisfying snaps in the motion, both in the character animation and also the effects themselves. Um, that would be an example of some pillars, but there's many games out there that are bright and friendly. And so one way to simplify it for yourself, if you're saying, I want to go into games, could be thinking of what are some pillars that matter to me in the games that I play. And so let's give some others, like dark and moody. Can you think of any dark and moody games, Halsey,
Oh man.
that come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, the Diablo series, for one, I think is
Mm,
like one of the most classic examples there. Um, oh man, we were just talking about Mario, so my brain is like thinking of like, oh, Fortnite and Minecraft and like a bunch of like really colorful things, dark and moody games. Yeah, I think of Diablo. I think also in some ways like Civilization. Now that they went often into this this particular branch of style where it is softer than realistic, but a little bit more gritty and a little bit darker
mhm.
uh, then maybe other examples we could insert here. But yeah, those are some that come to mind.
I mean, yeah, it's funny because stylistically speaking, these two, like, I mean, you think of Diablo 4 and then you think of like Remnant 2. They're both dark and moody and rather spooky. Could be another word. It might not be a style that's appealing to you. It might be very appealing to you to work on a game like that, and that could be interesting to explore more details on what that style could be. There's other things like, I mean, moving along to something that's like vibrant and intense. I think of Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. I was just playing that game. I think it was a while back. I can't remember when I played it, but absolutely gorgeous effects. The effects in that game are so snappy and satisfying to use. Uh, Very high detail effects, which is interesting because it's kind of a cartoony world, but the way they rendered it in Rift Apart was also kind of dark and moody in a way, but then friendly and inviting simultaneously. They kind of mixed and matched to make a really interesting approach to that style. Uh, yeah, like it was that was a fun experience. What other styles you want to talk about?
Oh, let's see. Some other ones that might be. Ooh, what about have we talked about maybe some fantasy type games? Games that like uh, uh, try to emote some sense of wonder and take us to a place that's like beyond real, but not realistic.
What kind of games do you have in mind?
Oh, so one that comes to mind is Horizon Forbidden West. That was a
Hmm.
good one. Yeah,
I love
where
that game. Oh my gosh, it's so satisfying.
yeah, the like just like how the robots are uh like connected with the energy around things. There's like a um when I think of fantasy, I typically think of like very classic things like Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, something like that. So it's really
Mhm.
cool to see this magic take place in a completely different type of thing where like the magic is coming from the machines, you know. I think
Yeah, they
that's an
call it
example.
plasma energy, but then also like each of the different elements has a magical quality to it, even though there's like fire and
Mm,
poison and ice and all these others. But then, I mean, that's not really what those things do in real life. So in a way, they've stylized reality once again,
yeah.
even though you're like, oh yeah, that's real looking fire. But no, that's not what that's not what real fire does, right? Um, but they make it believable to the point where you think it's realism. So it's this fun blend of fantasy and reality.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Or like
Uh,
there's also like space magic in those, and I don't want to spoil too much of it for people who haven't played it, but the space magic that they use, or maybe it's not space magic, but it's like future magic, um, has some really cool qualities to it. Like the
I'm gonna butcher the quote. I'll have to look it up
okay, yeah.
to get it right. But there's a quote that says, any technology, any significantly advanced technology, uh, is indiscernible from magic."
Yeah.
And like if you were to see how things are going to be like 1,000 years from now, we'd
Hmm.
probably be like, "Whoa, that's insane. That's completely my mind wouldn't be able to even comprehend what I was looking at." And so
Right.
games like that really instill that feeling of, "Oh, I'm looking at magic," but there's like some technology to it. But all of these, it's so interesting how deep each of these subjects can be. Like there's no one path that's like, okay, get started on here and this is exactly where you're going to be later. Like starting as a student learning this thing, oh, then you're locked to here. There's all these different wells to choose from and to dive deep into and pull inspiration out of.
Absolutely. I mean, just to kind of like rattle off some more that I have in my notes. Things that are like punchy and playful, like Smash Brothers. Oh my gosh, they do such a great job with their effects. And I keep saying satisfying. So to me, effects and satisfaction are like joined at the hip. Like they're so interlinked. We as effects artists drive the satisfaction within a style. So we have to figure out what are my stylistic constraints and how can I make this thing really hit home for the player and make that experience immensely satisfying. Um, Definitely Smash Brothers is that for me. Valorant, it's got this like slick and edgy style that you see coming up in a lot of modern games. This idea of like clear shapes with amazing color and motion to just make them iconic and recognizable at a glance. It's like I know who used that ability, I know who that belongs to, I know what that is and what it does instantaneously. I know exactly where its area of effect boundary is at, so I know where to stay out or where to dodge or whatever. Valorant does an amazing job at these things with its style, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I think of oh man, I'm gonna butcher the name now. Is it Wayfinder that just came out? Is
Oh
that
yeah,
right? Or am I
Wayfinder.
thinking
Yep.
Wayfinder? Yeah, I haven't played it yet, and I've heard so many amazing things about it, and just like looking at like the gameplay, some of the trailers, I it's so cool to see this influx of um because I mean, you mentioned Valorant, and I think Valorant does a good job of this, where their characters, their environment, everything has its own particular look. Maybe that's
Yep.
a better word for it for right now. Its own visual like appeal. It's very slick. It's beveled edges, really crisp, and often what we find is like, oh, we want to make an effect, so we want to make it look real in this universe within this this
Mm-hmm.
setting. But with Valorant and with Wayfinder, it was just like, no, we're gonna make it a super graphic shape, very iconic, flat with a gradient, and it fits so well. It does such a great job of
Yeah.
uh, maybe standing out so much that it's just like ah, immensely appealing. It's so cool.
If you are a showboater, working on a game like that is perfect because it's like I want my effects to stand out from the world. I want them to leap out from whatever style the world and the characters are and just get up in your face and say, "Hey, I'm here. I am this really cool, awesome effect. Behold me and appreciate me." Like, not to say that those effects artists have an ego. I'm not saying that at all, but it's fun. It's fun to have effects these days that are such a big part of these games and you get to express yourself that way. I also think of like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. You
Oh yeah.
know, those effects leap out from the world that they sit inside of in such a great way because the world is this sort of like, you know, in many cases it's muted or high detail or doing whatever it's doing. But then you throw like a bomb arrow into that world and that thing just pops out like crazy and it's the most satisfying thing ever. So uh, yeah, then you have games on the other side that I want to give some focus to that are hyper real. Like I think of the Uncharted series or the other Naughty Dog games like Last of Us Part 1 and 2. Those games have this quality to them that where it feels like very immersive and grounded to this hyper realistic experience. And I say hyper realistic because it's almost like it just pulls you in to make you like appreciate the wow, like I don't even think dirt and grass has that much detail in real life, like it's like it's
Right.
more
Yeah.
detailed, it's more realistic than what I'm experiencing in this game. And that can be really fun. You mentioned Horizon Forbidden West, and I played that through to 100%. Also, the Burning Shores expansion is so good. And just seeing on a 4K display, like the detail. Like you can walk up to the
Mm-hmm.
screen and the detail is like so refined. It's insane. And I know a lot of times people will say, "Oh, it's so detailed. I love the detail." That is a part of this style of hyperrealism that we're seeing more
Mm-hmm.
and more in these next gen games, that it has an appeal all on its own versus, you mentioned Wayfinder, which I also just picked up. I play too many games. I'm a student of games, let's put it that way. I study games all the
Yes.
time. And it's more of a painting. It's more of a living painting where they've consolidated shapes and they've reduced detail, or they've contained it into areas that are low contrast so that it fits together as one larger shape. And this is, like I was saying, the difference between like Renaissance painting or Impressionist painting. In the Renaissance, they were like, let's capture all the detail, let's make it as realistic or hyper realistic as we can. Whereas Impressionists were like, let's remove detail, let's consolidate shapes and combine it together. And we still see that happening in games where they're adding more detail or removing it, and that can play into style. So there's not one wrong way to do it, and there's not one right way to do it. I think this is for you to choose what interests you personally, what's fun for you personally. And I've heard some people talk like, well, this is the best way to do it. I'm like, whoa, 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 that's how you like to do it. There's other people that really get a kick out of doing it
Yeah.
another way. All of us are game developers, all of us are effects artists, but we're a very diverse group. We do it in many different methods.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just like your opinion, man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's exactly
Eh,
it.
what's cool about that is if you get, or when you get a bunch of VFX artists in one room,
Hmm.
uh, even when they're working on the same thing, and this happened with us, at Riot, once a week we would get together and just all the VFX artists would get in a room, and what happens is uh, you're all learning from each other. Like there's
Yeah,
so much to learn. You could spend your whole life, dedicated to one part of this sliver, and it would be so fulfilling and just amazing. But there's all this other stuff that's out there, and it's just amazing to like swap stories and say, oh, I was using this technique, or I was trying this. I liked how they did it this way, and I was exploring with this. It's just incredible how
yeah.
many options there are to explore.
Now we've got to take a moment and give a shout out to our pixel art friends. They do some incredible work. I've dabbled just a tiny bit with pixel art myself, but games that are pixelated, we typically call them pixel art styles. And this has its own subcategory of styles. In fact, I think it's worth saying everything we've talked about kind of fits into a family of styles. Like we might say there's like the hand painted family, the shader driven family, the hyperrealism, the over animated family of styles. Um, these all are like sort of shorthand that we use as game developers to say, yeah, that's like this other thing. They're kind of like sharing a similar thing, but each style can be super unique. But within the pixelated styles, like games like Stardew Valley come to mind, or a lot of retro type things. Like there's Dead Cells. There's this really amazing game
Dead
that I love
Cells.
called Flint Hook that I
Yes,
think was
yeah.
like, did you ever play Flint Hook? That
Mm-hmm.
game is
Yeah.
so great. Has a great pixel art style, and yeah, within that, again, like you can do something that's moody, you can do something that's bright and inviting, you could do whatever you wanted, and it could all fit within pixel art. Some pixel art is actually quite high detail, some is low detail. So there's even variety there. Even though it's pixelated, you'd think it's all the same, but it's really not. So
Yeah, pixel art is such a huge just category of art that has all these different approaches. You could approach it with a super traditionalist, like very limited palette, basically doing the same workflow that that artists had to do, back in the 80s and early 90s, when it wasn't just like an art style. It was like the only way to work,
Yeah,
you know.
that's true.
uh, and back then, I'm sure they were like, "Ugh, I wish I could just animate this how I like to animate this, but I got 4 frames and 5 colors to work with, you know."
Hmm.
Uh, and so there's like a callback, there's a nostalgic callback to that visual, and then just kind of like, hey, what if the sky was open, the world was your oyster, and you could do anything with this visual? What could you do? What would you do? And so there's so
Exactly.
many really fun pixelated pixel art games out there. But yeah, I love it all. I'm a sucker for it. It's
Yep.
so friendly and inviting.
So then you've got things that are totally modernized, like Project L being developed by Riot Games. That's what it's called as a code name right now. I'm imagining they're going to release a real name for it someday. Um, but it's this beautiful fighting game with this. It's it's cartoony in a way, but it's a comic book type of cartoon, and they're blending 3D and 2D to create this hybrid style of just like I would call it like a living cartoon, like a living comic book, which is really beautiful. And there's other things that are like super high detail and gritty, like we mentioned before. On the other end of it, like I think of Returnal. Returnal is this great roguelike on next gen roguelike. It's very, very gritty, has some interesting stuff going on. But yeah, whatever terms you like to use, I think it's helpful to know the pillars that you're after when you're working on your portfolio, when you're working on getting ready for applying to a studio, and kind of just going for one at a time. I think this advice really is important to take in context when you're getting your portfolio ready for your first job, for your first studio. Try and identify what their style is. How would you describe it with adjectives? How would you describe it with maybe some of the methods that they're using to create that style? And do that in your portfolio. So that's probably the biggest takeaway if you have one from this whole video is like, which style do you want to start with to get your first job? And then save the others for later because you might be interested, like us, you might be interested in every style and think they're all cool. It can take a long time to learn just one style, right? So I recommend focusing on one at first that goes towards something that you like at first. Get that job working at a studio that uses that style. And there's going to be more than one. There's not just one studio that uses each style. So that later on, you can always transition into learning more styles and broadening your skill set. But you'll probably be better served that way. Would you have any advice to add to that, Halsey?
Uh, that is such great advice. I wish I would have been told that early on in my career. I was just like, hey, find a place that uh, you like what they're working on, and join in that way. It really does save a whole lot of time, and that's where they started. They At some point someone said, "Hey, I really like X. I really like the way that this looks.
Mhm.
I really want to make a game that is in this visual, this style, this mood, what have you." That's where they
Mhm.
started. So if you can start your search off that way, then you will do yourself a whole lot of favors, and speed things up. Yeah, for sure, for
Yep.
sure.
Great. Well, that wraps it up for our section on style. We're going to move over to gameplay next. Thanks for joining, and we'll catch you in the next video.